Hello, everybody. I'm Adam Kellenhofer with WisPolitics.com here with a DC Wrap feature for you, where I am joined by Major Joe Trovato, a spokesman of the Wisconsin National Guard, and we're going to be talking about the Wisconsin Guard's effort helping with the state's vaccination effort, because they have played a pretty critical role during the whole pandemic. So, Major Trovato, how exactly did Governor Evers and the National Guard decide using National Guard members to help the vaccination effort was the right move forward?
Yeah, well, I think, that goes back to the Guard has really been involved in the pandemic response since day one, dating all the way back to early March of 2020. The first mission we had was to help transport cruise ship passengers back home from a cruise ship that docked in California and had Wisconsin residents on board that may have been exposed to COVID. And since that time, we have been involved in every step of the way. Our biggest effort certainly was the COVID testing program that was administered statewide. We did over 1 million COVID tests, and that effort is actually still continuing in some communities. But then as the vaccine was rolled out towards the end of 2020 and into January of 21, the National Guard, we were ready, we were available, we certainly were engaged in the pandemic response, and frankly, we had been accustomed to partnering with the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, other stakeholders across state government, local health departments, tribal health departments. So it was kind of a natural fit for us to be involved. And this is a whole of government approach, certainly. The Guard is only a small part of the state's overall vaccination effort, but we were ready, we were available. We pride ourselves on being an adaptable and flexible force that can really tailor what we do to almost any need that the state has. So while pandemic response is something that's new for us, serving our state during times of emergency is very much one of our core missions. So filling in and helping where we could to help the vaccine rollout was something that was just kind of a logical continuation of our larger COVID response.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thank you guys thank you all very much for your service, both with vaccinations and otherwise. But aside from the vaccinations, I know that the National Guard has a lot of other duties to perform. So what kind of percentages of the Wisconsin Guard actually helped with the vaccination effort? And how many troops is that? And are those just doctors and medical personnel assisting, or are they just regular troops?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a little bit of everything in that answer. So we have about 10,000 citizen soldiers and airmen that make up the Wisconsin National Guard. So a little over 7,000. It's about 7,200 Army National Guard, and then about 2,300 Air National Guard as well. So, and they're from all walks of life. They live and work in the same communities all across Wisconsin. They might be small business owners, teachers, nurses, whatever the case may be as civilians, but then they put on the uniform when called and serve the state and the nation as needed. And of those 10,000, at our peak, we had about 1,400 troops that were serving on the COVID pandemic response. We've had about 1,700 total that have served in some capacity for COVID since the pandemic began, but the peak at any one time was about 1,400 last spring, 2020. Currently, we have about 500 troops that are directly supporting the COVID response. And of that 500, it's probably about 150 or so that have been directly engaged in the vaccination efforts. So the remainder are, support, logistics, administration, and still the COVID testing effort is very much, utilizing some of our staff as well.
Interesting. Yeah, the pandemic has definitely brought on a lot of logistical challenges for, I think, pretty much every single industry, and it sounds like National Guard is not excluded from that.
Correct. And
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. So yeah, I was just going to say too, and you had also asked about if they were all medical personnel or if they were from other other military occupations. So it's a mix. So we have actually most of them that are involved in the vaccination effort, and actually most who have been involved with the COVID testing effort are not from medical backgrounds. We started off in that arena, but as the pandemic kind of continued last spring, we were able to train a lot of additional people from every different military occupation, where they could be cooks, they might be mechanics, they might be infantrymen, artillerymen, whatever the case may be. But anybody who's actually administering a vaccine from the National Guard, they are either a medic or a medical professional. But all of the folks who are assisting with, administrative support, data entry, greeting, check-in, even traffic flow, they're from any different number of military occupations, because you don't need to be a medical professional to be able to do those things. And frankly, medical professionals are in high demand, of course. So we're trying not to use them in non-medical roles.
Perfect. That makes perfect sense to me. So we mentioned some of those logistical challenges just briefly. What were some of the other challenges that the Wisconsin National Guard faced while helping out with this whole vaccination effort?
Well, it's a whole of government response. This the entire pandemic response has been, and really wasn't a challenge necessarily, but we've worked with so many different health departments, so many different agencies across state government, and it's been really rewarding. Certainly challenging anytime you're trying to synchronize efforts across so many different echelons, from local government all the way up to the federal government, but it's truly been rewarding because everybody has come together so well across our state, across our nation, to really provide the best possible response to the people of Wisconsin, and we're just a small part of that. We always serve in a support role. That's something that we try to remind people, is that when the National Guard is mobilized in a domestic response like this, whether it's a pandemic response or it's a flood or a tornado or whatever the case may be, the National Guard does not come in and take over. We are always in a support role to whoever is managing the response, whether that's a local sheriff or in this case, a local health department or the state Department of Health Services as well. So we're always in that support role, and that's something that is sometimes a challenge to communicate to people who see the National Guard out there, at a testing site, for example, and assume that the National Guard is in charge and running it, and we may be kind of running the individual logistics at a particular site, but we always want to reiterate to people that we're very much in support of that local health department that requested our assistance in the first place.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So during the beginning of the whole vaccination effort, Wisconsin led the entire nation in its vaccination rate for quite a while. Do you think that the Wisconsin National Guard played a significant role in that vaccine rollout?
Well, I think everybody did. I certainly, we're very proud of the Wisconsin National Guard's contributions to helping ensure that we got the vaccine out in a really a timely, expeditious manner across the state and to many different communities. And that was really the state's effort from day one. Was they wanted equitable access to the vaccines to every different neighborhood, every different community in Wisconsin. And I think we played a role in that. I think credit really belongs to the Department of Health Services, all of state government, and we were proud to be a part of that effort. But I certainly wouldn't take credit for it from the National Guard's perspective. But again, we were proud to be part of that effort. And we had the first thing that we did was establish these mobile vaccination teams, and that was a partnership with the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, where these teams were made up of about 6 personnel. 4 or 5 of them usually were coming from the National Guard, and then one or two of them were vaccinators that were sourced locally, generally from the local health departments or just local community volunteers or staffing agencies, whatever the local health department came up with to help with the vaccination. But those smaller teams were and continue to be a critical part of ensuring that communities that maybe didn't have the resources to establish their own vaccine clinics early on, that they had personnel and resources available to them to actually hold a successful vaccination clinic for either a targeted population, especially early on when the vaccine was still tiered and only certain groups could get it, and it was very, I think, helpful, a helpful resource for those communities to be able to have that option in their back pocket to rely on, because it freed up their limited staff to be able to focus on the next phase or other health department duties. So, we played a small but I think pretty critical role in ensuring that Wisconsin was able to kind of lead the way in getting the vaccine rolled out in the early stages.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You mentioned the local teams, because it seems like that is more of the direction that health departments across the country are going. So it sounds like the National Guard has been ahead of the curve on more than one curve here. But what were some of the lessons that the National Guard has learned from all of this? Not necessarily just the vaccination effort, but the whole pandemic from start to where we are now.
Well, I think, as I kind of was alluding to earlier, what pandemic response is something that we'd never done before. This was not something that we had done. Maybe a couple of different scenarios and tabletop type exercises where we had considered the possibility of how the National Guard might assist during a pandemic, but they really couldn't prepare specifically for the COVID-19 pandemic. Nobody saw it coming, at least we didn't. But at the same time, a lot of the same principles are still in play. We have two core missions in the National Guard. We're certainly the primary combat reserve for the Army and the Air Force. That's our federal mission. But in our state mission, we're the first military responder during times of emergency here at home. So while COVID-19 was something that was very new to us, we actually exercised a lot of the same procedures and response procedures that we would in any other kind of domestic emergency type scenario. Name a different instance where the National Guard is mobilized, and we're really going through the same staffing processes to try to come up with a solution to be of added value to whoever is requesting our assistance, whether it's a local community, a police department, a sheriff's department, a fire department, or a health department in this case. And so there were a lot of lessons that we learned though early on. Actually in the initial weeks of the pandemic, we were looking at other states that were maybe a little further along in the pandemic, like New York and some of the East Coast states where the outbreaks had kind of initiated in the United States. And we actually saw that how they were doing COVID testing through these mobile drive-up testing sites. And we borrowed their blueprints basically, and then really tried to refine those processes and make them as efficient as possible. And lo and behold, Wisconsin actually ended up being by far and away the number one state for COVID testing from a National Guard perspective. We did more COVID tests as the Wisconsin National Guard than any other National Guard across the 54 states and territories by a pretty wide margin, actually. So that was something we just adopted some lessons learned from those other states that were dealing with it before we were. And then we just really implemented a lot of processes and procedures to make those sites as efficient as possible and user-friendly as possible. So that's just one example, but there were a lot of things throughout the summer last year, especially that allowed us to create even more efficiencies in that testing process. We started adapting along with DHS and the rest of the state, some different technology where people, were getting QR codes basically on their smartphone and using those to check in at a testing site or pre-register at a testing site, so we can move lines along faster than having people sitting in lines for hours and hours at a mass testing site. So all of those things really contributed, though, to just creating a lot of efficient models that ultimately just were continuously improved upon.
So the coronavirus pandemic has really hurt a lot of populations across the US and kind of disenfranchised a lot of people, made them stay at home, and kind of helped or made them feel out of touch with a lot of other people. Do you think this whole effort of fighting the coronavirus has strengthened ties within the Wisconsin National Guard, or has this made a more robust National Guard? Is that anything that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. It's kind of unique because even in talking with just acquaintances and friends, when everybody else last year was asked to stay home and really kind of shelter and stay out of the public, really, it was actually the exact opposite for us. We were coming together and really gathering up our troops and our equipment and refining processes and procedures and starting this response that ultimately became actually our largest sustained domestic mobilization in Wisconsin National Guard history. That history dates all the way back to 1837, before Wisconsin was even a state. We've had periods of greater mobilization throughout our history. If you think back of World War II and even the Civil War and World War I, and we've had long and numerous deployments for the global war on terror since September 11, 2001. But never before have we mobilized this many troops for so long right here in the state of Wisconsin. And that experience has been absolutely invaluable to creating a more effective, highly developed force that I think will really be in a good position to continue to serve Wisconsin in any way going forward. Because all throughout this year, we've had young leaders, young non-commissioned officers, young officers who have been directly engaged on a day-to-day basis, developing their troops, developing their skills, developing their leadership attributes as well, managing people as part of a coordinated effort that spans the entire state and even outside of our state as well. And the lessons that those troops have learned and the relationships that they've built, the networking that they've done, and the leadership experience that they've gained throughout that entire process is going to serve the Wisconsin National Guard extremely well going forward. And because of that, it's going to create a force that's more flexible, more nimble, and more adaptable to whatever our state asks of us, and really even whatever our federal mission throws at us as well in future overseas mobilizations too. So that experience of these troops, many of whom have been on orders continuously since March of 2020 until the present day, they couldn't have replicated that experience and training, and doing it as part of a real world response is something that'll stick with our organization for a long time.
Perfect. I'm going to record 2 outros here just
okay,
because I definitely, JR hasn't gotten back to me on doing an interview about like overseas deployments yet, but that's
okay.
I think that would be the most interesting like additional interview if you're up for it.
Yeah, so, anytime, honestly. So
perfect. Sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So, all right, let me just do these. Well, Major Trovato, thank you very much for joining me on today's DC Wrap feature. And I am definitely interested to hear more about those overseas deployments from the Wisconsin National Guard. And I'm sure many of our readers and viewers and listeners are interested too. But until that next interview comes, I hope you have a wonderful summer and happy belated Memorial Day. And once again, I am Adam Kelnhofer with WisPolitics.com. Thanks for tuning in.